So we are now recording in progress, and I'm going to share my screen. And oh shoot, wait a minute. Hang on, one more time. I'm gonna there we go, because I'm gonna have some sound. There we go. Okay, so you should be able to see my wait. There it is. Do you see the slide with the flag?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And I actually want to start by talking about the flag of Israel, not just because it's a nice flag and a lot of us relate to it in many ways, but because it is very much a symbol that has been significantly taken over by different movements within Israel right now. And in the struggle for democracy that we're going to be looking at and talking about, it's a symbol that has very much played an important part in what's going on. The flag itself has an interesting history, and especially the Star of David, which is not by any means an ancient symbol of Judaism. It's relatively recent, but the blue stripes are where do the blue stripes come from?
Talit.
Yes, good. So the Talit, which you see here, Rabbi Gilad Kariv, Reform Israeli rabbi, wearing a talit with classic blue stripes. That is what gives us the stripes of the talit itself. So there is a piece of religion involved in it. But in recent years, it's been kind of well, as with the American flag as well, people are trying to use it for whatever purpose they choose. So here I believe this was Yom HaAtzmaut 2018, the soldiers are marching through Machne Yehuda, the big produce market in Jerusalem, with Israeli flags on their backs. I think probably just a standard thing for them, which is very different than what you see here. So here you see Israeli flags flying over the Muslim quarter of the old city in Jerusalem. This is not innocuous. This is very purposefully meant to wave over people who, by the people waving them, the people they're waving over are not welcome. So those who choose to do this in this way in the old city are making a very purposeful statement. So it's a fairly right-wing statement. The center, right, and left that are at the heart of this current struggle for democracy in Israel are taking back the flag. And it is very apparent because at all of these demonstrations, the Israeli flag is extremely prominent. This is just one example. This is the demonstration that some of us were at in Jerusalem. There were about 30,000 people there, and there were many flags. Hang on, I just need to respond to a text because we have an alarm going off. I assume it's innocuous. Okay. Anyway, so you see the rainbow flags, the pride flags. There, I saw some other examples out there that of the, again, left, center, and center right, who are all on the same side during this current struggle for democracy. It's really extreme right that is at the foundation of this current move in the Knesset. But the rest are really trying to take back the symbol and use it for the purpose of democracy in Israel. In addition to the flag, another thing they're using is drums. So throughout, we're seeing flags and we're seeing drums. And if you think of drums in the sense of like the music from Les Miserables and the revolution, the French Revolution, let's see if I can get a little sound. Sound of drumming, the marching beats. You hear that? Give me a thumbs up. This has been characteristic of the demonstrations for democracy, flags and marching rhythm there. This is in Tel Aviv. I was told there were about 150,000 people at this particular demonstration. Okay, it was intense. There were tens of thousands. That last one, I heard that there were about 150,000 people there. And at that time, it was one of the largest demonstrations in the history of Israel, from what I was told. But in the couple weeks since then, at least when you put together all the different demonstrations that were going on across the country, far more people were coming out and continued to do so. So just a little quick background and structure of the Knesset so we understand how this all plays into what's going on. And important to remember that here, David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel and definitely one of the founders of the modern state, had no idea what he was getting himself into. There's complete agreement that if he had foreseen what would be taking place now with the way the traditionalist Jewish religious communities are taking their power, they clearly would have been much more careful about putting safeguards into place. The ultra religious, very small minority, when Ben-Gurion was involved, was it was much smaller. It was, a lot of it was anti-Zionist, anti-government, so they were not a factor. They would not vote. They would not participate in the Knesset. It wasn't until decades later that they realized, oh, we can get money, we can get power. Oh, but that also reminds me that, and this is something fun I found in the one of the Israeli museums. Our action figure of the evening is David Ben-Gurion. So here, so here's Ben-Gurion, action figure. You can get your own online. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of them. Okay, so let's get to the Knesset, what it is and how it's made up, just so we understand, and the current Knesset, meaning the current seats in it and how this plays into it. So Likud, which is center-right, established in 1973, they would be, so I'm going to be careful about our own politics, but if you take the classic, not about today, but the classic traditional Democrat and Republican, Likud would represent today's, the traditional Republican. Where we're at today is a whole nother ballgame, but center left. So Likud has 32 seats in the 120 seats of the Knesset. Yesh Atid There is a future, was established in 2012. They're centrist. And their leader was Yair Lapid, who was a television comedian in Israel. But hey, Volodymyr Zelensky was a television comedian as well. So we should be careful about judging TV personalities and their fitness for leadership. Religious Zionism, which is made up of a couple different parties, including Otzma Yehudit and Noam, and they are far right, ultra-nationalist, Jewish supremacist. That is how they are described from relatively neutral standpoint. They have 14 seats. The ones in blue are the ones who are part of the current coalition. The National Unity Party, established in 2022, led by Benny Gantz from the Blue and White Party, again, relatively centrist. Shas is, and that's short for Shomrei Sfarad, the guardians of the Sephardic, but in this case it means Yemenite, but they'll also have the Moroccans and other Mizrahi Jewish communities. They were founded by ultra-Orthodox Sephardic Jews in 1984, but it includes non-religious Mizrahi Jews who feel they're best represented by Shas. United Torah Judaism was established in 1992, and this represents some of that shift because it was made up of the groups Agudat Yisrael, Degel HaTorah, Haredi ultra-Orthodox groups, some of whom before this would not get involved, but realized, okay, there's money in this. So they have 7 seats. Yisrael Beitenu was established in 1999. It's a right-wing secular party, so they didn't go into the coalition because they have secular values, more of the religion-state separation, and a lot of former Soviet immigrants are a part of Yisrael Beitenu. Hadash Ta'al originally came from the Arab Joint List and way left-wing parties. And then Ra'am are the other members of the United Arab List. And then the Labor Party, which used to be the biggest, most powerful party next to Likud, they're down to 4 seats. So they would be the equivalent of what was the Democratic Party. So Democrat versus Republican, Labor versus Likud. So the current coalition has 64 seats. You need 61 to run the government, and the opposition has 46 seats. That's the current government. I'm going to pause for a moment. Any questions at this moment? Kind of get it. Parliamentary government, 120 seats in the Knesset. Yes, Terry.
The first 4 that you mentioned, Likud, Religious Zionism, Yesh Atid, and National Unity Party, what is that, 36, 40, 46, 58, it's over 80 seats.
Yeah.
The way you describe them, they all sound centrist. They all sound to have similar values.
Right.
Why aren't they coming together as a majority to be a centrist formed government?
And if you remember, the last government had right and left together in the government, Yair Lapid sharing with Netanyahu, where this current coalition differed and would not come together was, are we going to immunize Netanyahu against prosecution? And so people in the center, people center right, and people anywhere left of center are unwilling to give Netanyahu what he wants. So he could not get any of the center, center right, or center left to join him because they were not willing to immunize him. But we'll get into that a little bit more.
And that's what it's all about, is keeping him from being held accountable for something he supposedly or didn't do?
Hang on, because I'm going to get further into the specific reforms that have been proposed. So we'll
Okay,
see,
okay.
and then you can make a judgment on whether that's what you think it is or not. Any other questions at this point? I can go on. Okay. So just a few pictures here and there. Last time, I was just in Israel for the CCAR conference. Every 7 years, we do our CCAR conference, our annual conference in Israel. This was 7 years ago, where we actually had a meeting of our group at the Knesset, which was not going to happen this time because it's too politically charged for them to host the reform movement. And because it's significantly right, it wasn't going to happen in either case. I don't know if is my pointer showing up on the screen? Give me a thumbs up if you can see my pointer. Okay, so here's Rabbi Rick Jacobs. I'll show him in a moment. Rabbi Denise Eger, past president of CCAR. Here's Anat Hoffman, the past head of the Israel Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism and head of the Women on the Wall, and Rabbi Gilad Kariv, who is now a member of the Knesset. And this was one of the early Ethiopian Israeli Knesset members. Here is, at the time, Isaac Herzog was a member of labor to the Knesset. He is the current president of Israel, which is a diplomatic function. And so you'll hear him being mentioned as the potential mediator in what's going on today. Okay, so I'm going to get into the proposed judicial reforms. And again, I'm kind of interspersing some images throughout. I decided to walk from our hotel across town to get to the first demonstration that I was able to go to while I was there, the one in Jerusalem. And everywhere I went, I saw people with Israeli flags, which is exactly what's happening here. Just I'm walking across town and they were all heading the same direction because I was just guessing as to where I was walking, figuring I knew where I was going, but I kept seeing people like these guys on the cycles with their Israeli flags. So I knew I was going in the right place. So there was an article last December in Haaretz, which is kind of the most intellectual of the Israeli newspapers, that spells out each of the different proposals and where they stand. And let's take a look at them. One of the more significant ones is the appointment of judges. And this was hard to boil down, so I kind of summarized it rather than giving the brief description that you'll see with some of the others. So under the current rules of the Israeli Supreme Court, there's a judicial appointment committee that has 9 members. 3 of them are current justices and includes the president of the Supreme Court, like our Chief Justice. 2 are ministers of the government, including the justice member. 2 are just plain old Knesset members. 2 are representatives of the Israel Bar Association, and 7 of 9 must support a candidate. The way it was described to me is this is a pretty diverse group, and because of it, they tend to get decent balance in the Supreme Court, the chosen Supreme Court justices. People may not agree, like certainly Netanyahu is not pleased with the appointments, but they tend to be fairly balanced and fairly centrist because it's a pretty wide group that needs to agree on them. The proposal is to expand the court, heard that one before, to 11 members. To expand the Judicial Appointment Committee to 11 members. 3 would be justices, the Supreme Court president, and 2 retired judges chosen jointly by the justice minister and the court president. Now, the justice minister is chosen by the ruling coalition. So that's someone with a political appointment. And that happens in the other case as well, but we're going to tick off how many of these current ones are there by virtue of what could be narrow elections. 3 ministers from 3 different parties, including the justice minister, but we just saw that there were 4 or 5 different parties, 6 maybe, in the ruling coalition. So there's no expectation that the ministers would include someone from a non-ruling coalition. 3 lawmakers, in this case, I'm sorry, 3 from the coalition and 2 from the opposition. So there's a bit of balance there. And a simple majority can choose with as long as there's just 1 opposition member and a Supreme Court judge. So it appears that, and the concern, of course, is that this has less safety in it, and that this will over politicize the selection process. It's getting too deeply into this. We'll get into some weeds, but clearly, with the hundreds of thousands of Israelis out protesting, you have a massive amount of people who do not agree that this is the right way to go. And this is one of several proposed changes to the way the government's going to work. So this is just one piece. And again, just to give you an idea, the demonstration I went to outside the Knesset, that they thought were about 30,000 people, I couldn't get a great vantage point from where I was standing. I was too stuck in the middle. So I got back to my hotel room and looked at the coverage. So this is just one aerial shot of the group going to surround and march around the Knesset. It was immense. What was nice to see was that it was very good-natured. The people there were all in a very friendly mood, and there was not significant tension in the crowd. All right, next of the, and there are a whole bunch of these, so let me try to get through these. So now, next one, number 2, the override clause. I'm going to read the basic description that we saw that the newspaper article put together. Since the mid-90s, the High Court of Justice has struck down laws that violate Israel's basic laws, which is kind of their version of the Constitution, and disproportionately violate individual rights. So they're trying to protect individual rights. The proposed amendment to the Basic Law on the Judiciary would enable lawmakers to enact laws that were overruled by the court. So if the court overrules it, this would give the Knesset, if they vote 61, a 1-seat majority, it would prevent the judiciary from overturning the law. And so one of the major discussion points and one of the proposed compromises is just to make that a significantly larger number, that it would take a supermajority, for example, to overturn the Supreme Court's judgment on whether or not a law is legal. So, okay. Here we are heading up to the Knesset, and again, everywhere I went, marching with there were some who were marching with drums, but some were just kind of sauntering, walking. It was all good-natured, but lots and lots of flags everywhere we went. Okay, the next law they call Dairy 2. And it has to do with Aryeh Dairy. So today, the High Court's judicial review powers extend to cabinet appointments and allow it to block them. So we have, one of the things that we've been talking about here in America is that under, I believe it's the 14th Amendment, if an impeachment has happened on whomever, I'm not getting specific, they can determine that that person can no longer hold an office. So here in Israel, what happens is the High Court can determine that someone is not eligible to hold office or run for an office. And it's normally in response to, as we see, Aryeh Deri had previously been blocked due to a criminal conviction. And the only exception would be if the eligibility requirements are expressly stated by law. So when the court looks at a case and says, yeah, this person can't hold office, generally because I think always by a criminal conviction, this would do away with their ability to do that. And where this is a very specific at the moment is the person who is driving this forward and trying to do away with the court's ability to do this is a prime minister who is under indictment. So he's not recusing himself. He is moving this forward, and clearly he has a stake in the matter. Okay, I'm going to breathe for a second. Any comments or questions? Let's try not to get too deep into the politics until I get through all these. We'll have more time to discuss later as well. Hannah.
Wouldn't that last change also apply to Netanyahu? Should he be convicted? He too then would,
That's who I was referring to.
Okay, yeah.
He is under indictment.
I thought you were talking about Deri or somebody else.
Deri would be covered under this too, but
right.
Netanyahu, because Deri's already been convicted. Netanyahu is under indictment. So he has not been convicted, right. Innocent until proven guilty. Terry.
Why have you made such an issue of the showing of the Israeli flag as significant in these demonstrations?
Because they are. So it's not that I'm making an issue of this. I'm reflecting what the group, the hundreds of thousands who they call themselves the demonstrators for democracy. They have very clearly, specifically chosen the flag more so, and the drums also, but the flag very much as their representation. And I think, and the Israeli political commentators, the news commentators have all observed this and remarked on this. And it has to do really with, the battle. Each side, we see this in America as well, each side is claiming that they are the patriotic ones. And so in this case, the center, the left, the center right is saying, we are not ceding our patriotism to the people who are claiming to be patriotic, but we don't agree with them. And so,
okay, I guess I'm confused. Are they in support of Netanyahu's judicial reforms or against it?
So the demonstrators are absolutely against Netanyahu and his government. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on. So striking down, another one of the proposals is has to do with striking down basic laws. And again, basic laws, Israel does not have a constitution, so basic laws function somewhat as a constitution without as much teeth. Until now, the High Court has not intervened in basic laws. Nevertheless, the court has determined that it can invalidate a basic law in cases where the Knesset has misused its authority as the constituent authority. Under the proposed amendment, a section will be added to the basic law on the judiciary stating the decision of the High Court ruling regarding the validity of the basic laws is no longer enforced. So this would be basically like telling our Supreme Court that they could not rule on something that affects the Constitution and the constitutional amendments, which clearly our Supreme Court not only does, but is entrusted to do. Okay, hang on. All right. Let's see. I caught a few good signs. This one in English. My religion is democracy. I worship it every day. One of my friends noticed that the vast majority of people demonstrating did not identify as religious. They did not wear kippot, but but I also know that there are observers and commentators that have said that there are very clearly people who consider themselves religious who are not able to stand for Netanyahu's proposals and the people working with him. Okay, so last was striking down basic laws, which are more constitutional weight. Here is striking down regular laws. Currently, a simple majority of high court justices is needed to strike down a law passed by the Knesset. So a simple majority of the justices can nullify a law from the Knesset. In the proposed amendment, the High Court would only be allowed to strike down a law with a supermajority of the judges, and only in instances in which the law clearly contradicts a provision in a basic law. So again, they're trying to take the teeth out of what the Supreme Court is able to do. Let me breathe for a moment to step back and say that a huge amount of Israelis agree that some Supreme Court modifications may be necessary. They agree that it's time to look at it, but what's going on now, their concern is so clearly purposeful and meant to completely disembowel the court and to keep Netanyahu out of jail. The unfortunate thing is that the people who are there to propose the laws are very clearly concerned about what the laws may do to them personally. So if you were going to reform the Supreme Court, this is not the time to do it. This again is in Jerusalem. Part of the reason I like this one, so while the Star of David on the flag is not necessarily an ancient symbol of Judaism, the lion that we see there on the staircase, that is one of the most ancient symbols of Judaism. The Lion of Judah, and then of course the seven-branched menorah is the other of the most ancient symbols. The Star of David, which has no bearing on David except for our naming it that way much later, really was concretized by the Zionist Congress at most a couple hundred years ago. All right. Subordinating police to lawmakers. This is another proposal. Currently, the police commissioner has the independence to set policy for the police and the general principles for its operations. According to the proposed changes, the police commissioner will be subordinate to the minister, and the minister will be able to set policy on the amount of time for handling cases. So again, here they're concerned about over politicization. A political appointee would have significant control over police priorities, as opposed to
Which minister? Which minister?
I believe this is well, it says the police commissioner. So I don't know if it's a specific police commissioner separate from the justice. Oh, no, I'm sorry. There's the police commissioner. I think this is the justice minister that they're talking about, but I'm not 100% sure. In Tel Aviv, when we were at the rally in Tel Aviv, Ehud Barak, former prime minister, was one of the speakers. That was pretty darn significant. Now, I will say that he had been under indictment, but but was not convicted of anything. I was thinking about that because, we're talking a lot in our news today about the unprecedented nature of a president being potentially under indictment. In the case of Israel, let's see, Ehud Olmert, prime minister, served 16 months in prison for bribes. Moshe Katsav, president of Israel, served 5 years for rape and other charges. One of the energy ministers served 2 years. A health and energy minister served 2.5 years. And he was actually cellmate with the former president for a while. And then, of course, Aryeh Deri, the interior minister, served 22 months for corruption. So sending Israeli politicians to jail is not by any means unprecedented, which makes it all the more concerning for Netanyahu. Okay, subordinating the Department of Internal Police investigations to lawmakers. I don't need to read the whole thing, but again, here we're talking about the ministers who are concerned currently about being under investigation would have complete authority over who's doing the investigations and what investigations are done. So that's of a concern. Here again, Jerusalem, just, one of the things I noticed was the diversity of the crowds and again, the good-natured. All right. Very specifically, a rule that allows for the High Court to declare the Prime Minister as unfit. Today, the law does not provide reasons for declaring a Prime Minister incapacitated. In light of previous rulings on the matter, the assumption is the Attorney General is authorized to declare incapacitation only under exceptional circumstances, such as the Prime Minister having been charged with a crime in a manner that prevents them from carrying out their duties, like corruption, and you don't get trust of the people if you're under very significant suspicion of corruption. According to the proposed amendment, it would be possible to declare incapacitation only for physical or mental inability of the Prime Minister. In addition, the law would require the declaration of incapacitation to be made by the Prime Minister himself. So he has to declare himself incapacitated, or by a vote of the cabinet with 75% of the full cabinet voting in favor. Anyway, this really takes it away from the court to be able to do this. And again, we're talking about a rule where it's it is so personal in the matter because Netanyahu is under indictment. Would they discuss this differently if it were not this current Prime Minister? I caught this picture live and then I saw it on the news. Someone really did a great job with this one. This was still in Jerusalem. Okay, legal advisors law. As it stands, the government and ministers are obligated to act according to the legal opinions of their legal advisors. So as with a lot of governments, ours, Israel's, you have people who tell you it's legal to do this or it's not legal to do it. And in Israel, they're obligated to act according to what the legal advisors tell them is legal to do. The proposed amendment would, again, take that away. So it becomes a recommendation. They don't have any obligation. Another powerful symbol that Israel has been using big time in the last couple months is the Handmaid's Tale. So, and I heard that Margaret Atwood, the author of the original book, supported this use for this purpose. But it was really powerful to see them there. I only saw them on TV. I didn't see them actually in person. Okay, so previously the Supreme Court justice with the greatest seniority of all the sitting justices was appointed president of the Supreme Court. The proposed amendment to law would amend the section saying that the president of the Supreme Court and their deputy president will be chosen from among the Supreme Court justices. That will be revoked. Instead, the Judicial Appointments Committee, which there's already concern that they'll become over politicized. They'll be able to choose a president and deputy president as they wish, which means that the committee could even appoint a president and deputy president who have never served on the Supreme Court before. So that's a very significant concern for a lot of the people observing this. I'm heading out of the demonstration. People are, it was kind of fluid. People are coming, people are going, thousands of people. And I could not help noticing Chabad was there to get people to put tefillin on. even in the midst of the demonstration. They were all over the place. And so here they are trying to get people and succeeding in getting people to put tefillin on in the midst of this. All right, let's see, another rule. I think this is the last one I have. Revoking the reasonableness standard. The reasonableness standard is a justification of administrative law used by a high court of justice and the administrative courts as a central tool for judicial review of government and ministerial decisions. Okay, the proposed changes would revoke the reasonableness standard, and the courts, so this is the courts judging how the government functions, could no longer use it for judicial review of the government and ministers. So they've got this way of functioning that is this reasonable or not? They use it to determine whether the law is reasonable or not. And this standard, according to their current functioning, would be done away with. Okay, let's see. I think I have, I don't know if this is a live clip. Nope. Massive building in Tel Aviv on our way to the march there, where we think there were 150,000 people. Kulanu Am Echad, we are one people, standing together. Separate thing I saw, a flag flying. This was way above my head. It was probably 15 feet up. And it says, and see if you recognize this, Odlo Avda Tikvatenu, Liot Am Chofshi Be'artzenu. So this is someone opposing the changes who's quoting Israel's national anthem, Hatikva, Odlo Avda Tikvatenu, we have not yet lost our hope to be a free people in our country. Couple clips I want to share with you. I think this is the sound of the it's a party. Demonstration, it's a party. It sounds like electronica nightclub going on. Here you may not understand the Hebrew term, but you will understand. They are concerned that democracy is at stake. And what was very significant in the rally we were at in Tel Aviv was that Rabbi Rick Jacobs, president of the Union for Reform Judaism, an American, basically, institution. It's not technically all American, but you get the idea. North American, certainly, was able to address the crowd. I have just a little clip of what he said, and you can hear how people reacted. I had a sense that someone didn't care a whole lot, but you'll hear their reaction.
Erev Tov v'Shavua Tov. אני הרב ריק ג'ייקובס, ראש התנועה הרפורמית בצפון אמריקה, שמייצג 2 מיליון יהודים רפורמים.
So they gave him some props, not bad. Again, on the way there, I passed all sorts of people flying the flag. This one says, we are obligated to oppose this, something to that effect. And they were all flying the flag. All right, I'm going to stop the slides and open up for questions and discussion. And I wanted to give you a basic overview of kind of what's going on. I will tell you, it's grasping the details of all these proposed changes is much harder to do than understanding that an immense percentage of the Israeli population is out demonstrating. When we say in America, if you have 150,000 people demonstrating, that's very significant. That's a lot in one demonstration. But in Israel, with a much smaller population, I think the number I heard, and don't check me on the math, is that's like 3 million people for us at one demonstration. It's just huge amounts of people who are out there. While we were there, it was pretty much very peaceful. Shortly after we left, there were some more aggressive actions. There have been some people opposing the demonstrations who have attacked some of the demonstrators. Some of the demonstrators have attempted to close down freeways. And at one point, police used stun grenades to prevent them from doing so, or to back them up. So it's gotten a little bit more challenging there. Oh, I just saw the comments. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So right. So in America, we have checks and balances to some extent. I mean, you know, it's always a concern. You have House, Senate, executive, and judicial. In Israel, you have the Knesset and you have the judicial. And the Knesset is swayed by a 61 vote. Some of us may be frustrated in whichever administration over how the filibuster functions in the Senate, but it's definitely a safety measure for whomever. It takes a lot to sway. They're talking about a one-person majority that can change all of these rules and sway it far one way or the other. Okay, I'm gonna breathe. Questions, comments, thoughts?
We have to do the house change.
Who wrote the proposed changes? Netanyahu did not write the changes. I believe he has an advisor, and I think his name is Levin, who has done a lot of the legal work behind the scenes. And again, there are people who agree, people on both sides who agree that changes should be made, but they're talking about sweeping changes that will have a much more significant impact. And when you look at polling, last I looked, easily 65% or more of the Israeli population was against this. We look at, our elections chosen by 51%. If you get an election that's 65%, that's overwhelming. So the overwhelming amount of the Israeli population are against these changes, but they're not the ones in political power. And they've been proposing some compromises, but so far the coalition has not been willing to listen to them. Steve, I see you have a hand up.
So my question is, aside from protecting Netanyahu, what's the end game? I mean, do they want to have an autocratic government like they have in Hungary or in Turkey?
Yep.
So this is for the most part right-wing to very right-wing religious. For example, one of the proposed laws that was not part of this, because this is a reform package, but a law that was proposed that I think is now not going to be considered because even Netanyahu knew he couldn't get away with this. In my next session, I'll be talking about women of the wall. They were going to throw women in jail if they wore a talit, a tallis at the Western Wall. So you have ultra-Orthodox who, again, didn't used to get involved in political life, who now want to run the country on their form of religion. And it's important for us to understand that the very significant majority of Israelis do not consider themselves religious at all. So this would be a rather small minority religious right-wing rule. David.
I have two different questions, I guess. One is about the timeline. if these reforms, so-called reforms, are passed, when is that expected to happen? And the second part of that question is, what would you anticipate to be the population's reaction if the reforms actually pass? The second question is, I'm astonished by the current status of the Labor Party, which for so much of the history of Israel was and before the state was formed, that ideology was mainstream. What's the impact of these reforms, do you speculate, on the Labor Party's future?
Okay, so let's see. I'll try to go back. So I'm not an expert on the timing. What I do know is that they're moving them very quickly. So, for example, for a law to pass the Knesset, it has to have 3 readings. And they're approaching reading number 3 on at least a couple of these proposed laws, which means they could be enacted very quickly. And that's really disturbing. How the populace will, well, okay, here's one of the things we know, and here's one of the reasons that we know that this is far right. So the heroes of Israel, some of the major heroes of Israel, are elite military units. And one of the very significant occurrences right now is that several elite military reservists. So, for example, a certain group of fighter pilots, the way I read this was described was, if these are the ones who would be called upon to bomb an Iranian nuclear power plant. They are refusing to do their military reserve duty. So when you've got people whose patriotism is unquestionable, saying we cannot do this, then it's really a good understanding that this is not popular among the middle right, and the entire left. So the current Labor Party, if you notice when I talked about the establishment of the parties, so for example, Yair Lapid's party, Yesh Atid, was established in 2012, and Benny Gantz's party, the National Unity Party, both outside of the coalition, was established in 2022. That is much of the labor. So and I have a much better understanding of our current American political process after really examining the Knesset. So in the Knesset, at the moment, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 parties that made the threshold to have seats in government. Now, if I'm going to break down our House by Knesset-style party. You've got mainstream Republicans, you've got ultra right-wing Republicans, you've got mainstream Democrats, you've got ultra left-wing Democrats, you've got those who consider themselves, who are affiliated as independent, or they're listed as independent. You have, I don't know if Green Party has any seats, but there are people who run. And there are others, but so that's 5, 6 parties at least, if we were to call them different parties. In Israel, they are actually different parties. They just vote in a coalition. So, for example, in our Senate, Bernie Sanders almost always votes with the Democrats. So when you count Democrat versus Republican, we generally lump the independents. Wait, no, he's socialist. Who's the independent one? There's an independent one.
Vermont, what's his name from Vermont?
Goes-
I think it's from Maine, isn't
It's
he?
from Maine.
Anyway, so the independent guy gets counted in when they say the Democrats have, what is it now, 53 or whatever it is, 52, 53. They're counting people who aren't Democrats, which is the same thing as saying the coalition versus the opposition. So the fact that Labor only has 4 partly has to do with current politics, but many who used to be aligned with Labor are now part of Yesh Atid or National Unity Party. They're representing the same values, the same political ideals and affiliations, but they're just not aligned with the Labor Party, but they would be in the same coalition. Hannah.
Thinking of Margaret Atwood's Women in Red, abortion is not legal there, is it?
It is legal.
It is legal?
Absolutely.
Now, are any of the changes proposed? I didn't see that. Are any of the changes that you outlined, do they have anything to do with choice?
No, they
I'm-
absolutely do not. I'm not sure what effect there might be. Currently, I believe that a Jew who wants an abortion may have to have a rabbi sign off on it. But that's not it's okay. I'm going to make a slightly educated estimation of how it functions. I don't think it's a significant issue because like under Jewish law, for example, the health of the mother, I'm sorry, the health of the person who's pregnant is a very serious consideration in continuing the pregnancy, and that includes mental health. So one can determine that they are just not able to physically or mentally go through a pregnancy, and that is a valid reason for an abortion under Jewish law, which is why already in America lawsuits are being brought saying that this is a First Amendment issue. The Jews are not able to follow our religion under these strict abortion laws because they do not conform to our religious belief. But there, it's legal. I see a hand in the Raposo household, and you're muted. Okay, now go ahead.
Yes, I converted to Judaism through the what is it? The not Orthodox, but
You're Reform.
No, I'm not Reform. I converted through the
Chabad?
No, God no. Through Rabbi Rick, it was a lot more intense than the Reform.
It is, that would still be reform.
It's still Reform.
Well, okay, but and it was because I believe in the state of Israel. I mean, to me, it's a very special entity, and I want to know, watching what's going on here, what can we do in the Reform, congregations and movement to maybe counter this
Right.
situation in Israel?
So good question. And we had this discussion with a couple members of Knesset, with Gilad Kariv, the Reform rabbi who's a member of Knesset, and with I'm blanking on his name. There's a gay member of Knesset. There's more than one, but one who spoke to us, who also interacted with us. And there are opportunities for us to speak to our leadership who have the ear of Israeli leadership. I mean, for example, when one of the ultra right-wing ministers just came to America, almost every national Jewish organization boycotted to make it clear that we are not pleased with this person's. This was Smotrich. That we're not pleased with where he's going with Israel politics. The Podolskis wrote down, how about supporting the New Israel Fund? I don't know enough about where their money goes. What I do know is that when the New Israel Fund is attacked by the right wing, much of what they are saying is just absolutely fabrication. The New Israel Fund supports things that the ultra right wing will not be happy with, but it supports causes that help us try to balance how life in Israel is taking place. One of the areas that is very helpful is the Israel Religious Action Center. So here in North America, we have the Reform Movement's Religious Action Center, which is a legal lobbying wing. In Israel, the Israel Religious Action Center, again, is a legal team that fights for the rights of vulnerable. So last time I was in Israel for CCAR, we met with Orthodox women who simply wanted to work for a living. Their community was preventing them from doing so, and the Israel Religious Action Center was representing them. We also met with a young man, an Arab young man who was attacked by ultra-right-wing Jews, and the Israel Religious Action Center was also supporting him and trying to get him justice. So yes, the New Israel Fund and the Israel Religious Action Center will work for justice for non-Jews, which some of us believe is extremely important as a part of just it's the right thing to do, as well as if you want a healthy, safe Israel, we need to do that as well. I will continue to explore some of the ways that may be helpful for this, and I'll try to get that information out. And if people have additional ideas they can share, we'll be happy to share them with everybody as well. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Hannah, I see your hand again.
Where's AIPAC in this?
I'm sorry, again?
Where is AIPAC? Where do they stand in this?
I don't know. Has anyone been checking on AIPAC? I don't have AIPAC and I don't always get along. So
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
I'm
Yeah, I
not
don't
sure
know.
what they're up to. And I have to say, I did not set out to have a problem with AIPAC, but they've pulled some stuff here locally without ever consulting me that was just not cool. And it was more their choice not to communicate, which frustrates me. But we have plenty of other ways of supporting Israel. So I'm not sure what they're up to. I think, if I remember correctly, other organizations have been disappointed that AIPAC has been silent on this. I'm now remembering some of what I've read recently. I don't know if they've come out with anything recently. I will say that the Reform Movement has been very clear in their opposition to what's going on. And part of that is not just because we think it's wrong, but also because we're there to protect the rights of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel, which includes Reform. It's not simply about Reform, but Reform absolutely believes in protecting those rights and making sure that those who are not ultra-Orthodox have a say in what is Judaism. there are plenty of mainstream Orthodox who are very uncomfortable with what's going on. Next time, I'm going to go deeper into what the Women of the Wall, which has a lot to do with the question of Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox versus non-Orthodox. We were there for Rosh Chodesh, which is the very specific time that the Women of the Wall attempt to go pray at the wall. And Women of the Wall was significantly founded by women who included Orthodox women. I don't want to get more into it because I don't want to get ahead of next week, but that's what we're going to do next week. I've skipped a couple weeks on the calendar for Passover and preparation for Passover. Although I heard that one of the ones I scheduled may be in conflict with what I'm hearing is going to happen for Yom HaShoah, so I may have to reschedule one of them, but I'll let you know if that's the case. But next week we are definitely on for Women of the Wall, which I think is a wonderful, amazing group of people, and it was a privilege to get to stand with them while I was there. I'm glad you all joined us. Stay tuned for more, and we'll see you all soon. You're welcome to schmooze for a few minutes.
Thanks, Rabbi. It's very interesting.
Yes, very good.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Great to
Rabbi.
see you all.